Sorry I'm late for this one. Illness, Easter holidays, lack of discipline. Anyway, time to actually bitch a little. Not a fan of this episode, episode 13. I think it exemplifies all the typical bad quirks of the adaptation. And let's begin with what it adapts, the first problem. It adapts the last 5 to 6 pages of chapter 73, chapter 74 and chapter 79, which is like just 50 pages, so it's also a slow episode. In the manga, this conversation with Thorfinn and Einar, and them and Snake finding Sverkel in the fields all happens directly after they finish cutting all the trees and Ketil leaves the farm. And all that is right after the curse of the head. The next chapter is Gardar's escape, then Arnheid getting assigned to take care of Sverkel and Snake being informed about Gardar. After which we get the whole sequence with Canute and the Ketil family. And then after that we cut back to the chapter where Thorfinn is listening to the Bible and Gardar appears. The anime has like the worst sequence possible for this. First Gardar's setup, we go back in time to right after Ketil left, where Einar and Thorfinn's conversation is completely disconnected in the sequence from the stuff it's supposed to follow. Something happened to Sverkel, scene right after deals with that. Snake learns about Gardar, organizes guests, scene right after guests find Gardar. Gardar is set up and paid off in the same episode. No time for it to stew and get mixed up and weave between the Canute and Sverkel threads too. Episode is doomed to transition awkwardly between scenes and not make the most out of them. All the chilling in the farm scenes put together in the same episode feels blunt. Look, all these character interactions to get you invested in the relationship are stacked on top of each other instead of dispersed throughout the storyline. It makes it feel like Arnheid arrives on Sverkel's house and Gardar attacks the next day, instead of this status quo having been a thing for a couple of weeks. Do not disagree with me and make excuses, please. I've had it with people always trying to excuse the way the anime orders things. When Season 1 decides to make stuff chronological while the manga has a very particular and intentional and meaningful flow of information, such a good decision. But when Season 2 contorts a very natural chronological sequence that also has a particular and intentional and meaningful flow of information, for God knows what reason, now you defend that? Actually, no, I'm wrong. I'll tell you why they did it too. They had a single Canute chapter and 2 small farm chapters, and after that 4 chapters that very clearly aligned with 2 episodes content. They couldn't make 2 episodes for the first 3 chapters, that's way too little content. And they couldn't make 1 episode of all 3 despite that being reasonable, because the season has to stretch the content of 6 volumes to 24 episodes. Can't afford to go that very reasonable speed. And that also leads the episode to not have content that is interesting to analyze. It's the connective tissue. But before I get to that, the second major issue, which I called it before the season started, lack of proper stylization, even if it would make it easier on them. Cowardice, I tell you, bad aesthetic decision. For some reason they're afraid of hard shadows even though they clearly work in other parts. That's the Gardar special and it's lost here. The Gardar intro does not even compare, even more than usual. Gardar just doesn't hit the same here for obvious observable reasons that are on screen, and don't you dare try to spin this another way. It's not just this scene either, that's how Gardar is almost always presented. His eyes are shadowed and hostile, and I'll talk about why this adds to the story beyond a purely aesthetic decision in the episode 14 review. Also, I've got the subs pissing me off. I thought they were really bad this episode. And why does Gardar say hair in the first scene? It basically spoils the surprise. This was clearly one of the episodes paid less attention to. I understand why. They're saving up, but I still can't help feeling unfortunate. In terms of the story here, really only a couple of interesting things to talk about. The Bible bit and how it's approached. Thorfinn is not actually religious, and the story in general does approach the story in a secular fashion. If Thorfinn took this path because he's a Christian, and his explanation is basically, well, because God said so, it sucks the interesting out of the story. Even if it would be the best historical explanation. But yes, love thy enemy is very in line with Thorfinn's mindset right now. Are you doing more than you need to or are expected to? That's what atonement should be. And in general, I do find that ideal admirable. People react badly to this one. What, am I supposed to just take it if I'm wronged? I think the supposed in the sentence here speaks a lot. People don't like a standard of goodness that they don't fit into, maybe? There's a lot to unpack here that's relevant to Vinland even. I feel like a huge part of this is a pride thing. The need to be perceived as winning, as being on top, or on the side of the winners, feeling that that's admirable. It's a very primal thing, fed by insecurity and instinct, and it of course still persists. while more recently self-sacrifice becomes a more accepted ideal, giving instead of taking, doing the right thing even if you end up only losing because of it. Much more fitting and functional as a community value, for actually living in a society, coexisting with others while having peace of mind. I like Snake's almost meta remark here. He doesn't like the preaching. He wants to go back to the early fun parts. New opening and ending, I don't have a lot of thoughts on the latter, but the opening, I love the visuals, very pretty. But like the very first opening, I just don't feel the music fits. It's too anime for me. Still the second best OP. They have this imagery, the idol made of branches. I don't have too deep a read on it. It just seems like a Viking Jesus vibes, like a cross. It also has a lot of scenes of stuff that doesn't happen. It's just there to look good. Like Lizard's head was crushed, not cut off, actually. And the very last frame, very interesting choice of imagery. You know, sometimes I really feel like I am in the same wavelength with Yabuta or whoever is inserting certain thematic connections in here. This visual and the ideas around it are not from Farmland, but are very crucial for the next major analysis I'm planning, which is mostly going through Farmland. And here it is, in the opening of this second half of Farmland. Someone cooked here. Second episode is a bit better, adapted chapters 80 and 81. Only 44 pages, but it also had some new stuff that kept it from feeling as slow as it could have. They did manage to adapt some of the excitement here. Okay fight, had some good animation at points. The last hit though was delayed a bit awkwardly. Coward change of dialogue. Snake threatens he'll kill Gardar. I mean, Gardar will most likely die anyway. Snake in the manga threatens to kill Arnheid, or just hurt her, or both her and Gardar. She's included in the threat. Snake has a conscience, but he will follow duty and the law above all else. He will keep that order. He personally doesn't discriminate between slaves and free men, but also that's how the world works. He will comply and you better too. A slave's opinion doesn't matter. Arnheid's situation is fucked, cause what's better for her and her unborn child is to submit to her life of slavery. People like Snake enforce that, like the guy in episode 1 said. The system has made sure that escape is not an option that's worth taking. So she is forced to abandon her husband, whom she does love. Now, Gardar is not reliable here. He is delirious, injured, enraged, and there's obviously something off with him. Mentally and physically, he has some deep wounds. Lack of spatial awareness, confusion, fuzzy memory. He definitely can't think rationally. And this is how the stylization enhances his character. Paints him as a threat and conceals his face. Who has he become? Is he trustworthy, or just a mad runaway slave? His current state disturbs Arnheid a bit, and like Snake puts into words here, she uses that as an excuse, so guilt and duty doesn't make her do anything stupid. Of course, she doesn't deserve to feel guilty here. This was the right way for her to act, but it doesn't work like that. Her flashback here, in and of itself, is not really a part I love, but it does make her character really interesting. The backstory serves to point out how Norsemen are too eager to go to war. Other parts of the story, like the previous episodes, did that while showing the underlying mechanisms and reasons. Now they are assumed and constant, and the story expects you to apply that information and think critically. They also added some bits to it, particularly Gardar's justification, which at the same time doesn't match too well with her beginning line, "I lost my son over a pot." But according to Anime Gardar, it's not only pots, which also makes her take on it and Gardar a bit less earned. But it's supposed to be an excuse anyway. But Gardar is also supposed to be wrong. Spherical's flashback is new, and here's me and whoever made this again being on the same wavelength. Also a bit that's very relevant to my future analysis, getting explicit attention. Weathering the storm or not weathering the storm. Neither is gonna prevent tragedies on its own. Personally, I view Arnheid's story to be about a person weathering the storm. I'll elaborate on my eventual analysis. The anime may view this the opposite way, since it feels Spherical's backstory is there to contrast her current decision, which is fine. Or it is just a comment on Arnheid's perspective of waiting out the storm. I still think they're on point with a general theme. Also, the wealth thing doesn't come up that much, so this is an acceptable, beneficial reminder. Only nitpick I have is that it's weirdly placed, right after another backstory. Thorfinn and Dinar are also in the opposite extremes, with Thorfinn under the oath and Dinar wanting to fight for Arnheid, even if he acknowledges that he probably won't be able to achieve anything. And in this situation, I think Thorfinn and Arnheid are clearly right. Acting now is most likely going to create more tragedies. And that's all for now. I have higher expectations for the next 2 episodes. I feel like they're likely to get the good treatment, and they need it.